Hi, everyone, and welcome to our conversation about Terrence McNally, Every Act of Life. A pleasure having you here with us. We're very excited about this panel discussion we're going to be having. My name is Matt Carey. I cover documentary film for Deadline.com and also for NonFictionFilm.com. We are joined today out of Los Angeles by Jeff Kaufman, the writer, director, and producer of Terrence McNally, Every Act of Life, and by producer Marcia Ross, also from Los Angeles. And we're very fortunate to be joined by two of the most extraordinary actors, both of stage and film. From Australia, Michael Shannon, you know from his Oscar-nominated work in Revolutionary Road, and Oscar winner Murray Abraham from Manhattan, who is a very long time friend and collaborator of Terrence McNally. It's great to have you all here for this discussion.
Thank you.
Hi.
Jeff, maybe I could ask you first. Well, tell us how this project came about and that rare opportunity to spend time with Terrence. And we see a real generosity of spirit, I think, in the interviews that you did with him.
Well, the interviews with Terrence and everyone else were a total privilege and also a wonderful learning experience. Marcia was a child of the theater. She grew up in, and she can speak for herself, but she grew up in Mount Vernon, New York, and used to take the train into New York, and she has seen a wonderful roster of plays. I grew up across the country and never had that chance, but I used to subscribe to Fireside Theater, you know, those monthly plays that you could read. So we had different connections, but the two of us, we did a film about the history of the marriage equality movement and really how these three amazing women who never got the credit they deserved launched the entire marriage equality movement that changed so many lives. And we wanted to tell the story of two people who came to Vermont where they lived and had a civil union, had a marriage. And we found out that Terrence McNally and Tom Curtihy had a civil union in Vermont, reached out to them, said, could we do an interview with you? And even before we did the interview, we said, you know, no one's ever done a film about Terrence McNally before. That seems like impossible. How is that possible? And if he's nice, if we like him, if he's interesting, because sometimes people who are talented are really not interesting. Let's see if we could do a film about him. And we just were knocked out by Terrence and Tom immediately. It was an amazing experience. They were incredible together. But we said, let's just discreetly wait a couple months before we float the idea. But we did, and they said yes. And it's been just a transformational experience.
And of course, this aired as part of the Distinguished American Masters PBS series, which is nominated for an Emmy. A 15th year in a row, actually nominated for Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Series, which is a pretty remarkable feat.
If I could just mention one quick thing, which is that at one point, Terrence, while we were filming, in between filming, he said, you know, what do you think is going to happen to this film? And I said, you know, you can never predict. We have hopes, but we don't know. He said, well, let me tell you what I would most like. I would love it if this film could be on American Masters. And we said, well, that'd be just great. But, you know, well, Terrence, you know, who knows? But anyway, it's so deeply moving to know that it was on American Masters, and that gave Terrence so much pleasure. So that was a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Right, I think no better home for it. And Murray, we hear in the film about your first encounter with Terrence, which in the movie talk, I guess you could call a meet cute. It was an unusual kind of way of getting to know somebody. But tell us that wonderful story, if you could, that you share in the film about auditioning for him and why that was so important to you.
That's it changed my life. That's what's so difficult for me to explain, because I was so certain when I went into audition without any kind of an appointment that that I understood the material, and I didn't know who this guy was, except that I just felt a connection with it. And I sat there and waited for about 12 hours, and they kept saying, "No, we don't see anyone without an appointment." The point is, at the end of the audition, everyone was done. They said, "Yeah, come in. I'd like to hear you. Go ahead, audition for us." And then that's when Terrence said, "He's my man." The point is, it's very hard to explain from an actor's point of view, if you don't understand the business, what it's like to audition 500 actors and at the end of the day, still be open enough to see what someone is willing to offer you. And that's what Terrence did. He really cares. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And we became friends, and we remain friends over all these years. What I'm saying, it was a very rare thing. And I was very, very damn lucky. And I mean that sincerely. I connected with his work and he saw it. And I just think that I don't want to go on too long because there's other things people want to say. But in our business, and particularly now, there's my clock, particularly at this moment with this separation that we're all experiencing with the coronavirus, the connectiveness that we long to feel again, because most of all, we're in the theater. And I miss that so desperately. But he represented that so precisely. He talks about that connection, but he lived it. And I don't think I'm talking out of school. I'm pretty sure that Michael will agree. It's not a common thing, but in fact, it's essentially, I believe, what the arts, theater particularly, is about, is that connection. I'm through talking. Michael?
No, I loved it. I mean, yeah, it's interesting to me because he always remained so approachable and so down to earth, despite a phenomenal string of success on his part. And I feel like really great artists, particularly storytellers, they're like conduits, things, they move through them, they absorb and they put it back out. And that was always happening with Terrence. It felt like he was always so perceptive and so empathetic and so, there was, some people, they reach a certain point and they enjoy their status and they enjoy the fact that they can kind of put up borders and make, oh, you're beneath me, or I don't have to deal with you. But Terrence never did that. Terrence always wanted to embrace and connect everybody in the room, no matter if it was, the assistant stage manager or the star of the show or the janitor out in the hallway. He just was always seeking humanness.
Yeah.
Right, and the film begins, Marcia, maybe you could speak to that. One of your first interviews with Christine Baranski is really talking about Terrence's character as a human being and how character would sustain him. And tell me why it was sort of important to, in a sense, frame the film that way, that as much as it's about his work, it's very much about his life and the kind of person he was, which Michael and Murray were just speaking.
Yeah, well, one of the things, as Jeff mentioned, I grew up going to the theater. I mean, I've seen both these gentlemen on stage many times. I love the theater so much. And I want to say one comment, and both of you said, I spent many years as a casting director. And I always say Terrence would have made a great casting director because he could see things in actors, you know, and he loved actors. I mean, he loved the theater too, so much that, you know, and Michael alluded to that, but he so loved actors and he was always, you know, open to that. You know, I think one of the things for me, because I've seen so much of his work, it was so incredible to really get to know the man behind the writing, because the man is in the writing. The more you really read the stuff and you get to know him, now you really see that. He brought so much of his life and his humanity and his integrity to everything that he wrote. He was a very passionate individual. And he also really had a lot of strong beliefs about things that were right and things that were important, and he wrote about them. You know, he didn't shy away from the difficult subject matter. I mean, Murray talks about this beautifully, about Terrence being the first person to really write just a gay person on stage, just another person. And Murray put it so beautifully in the film, and I think, you know, that's exactly what Terrence was about, you know, being true to yourself, and putting it out there, and whatever your political beliefs were, your sexual identity, you know, he had a lot of integrity, and it's all through his work.
It's really interesting what you said, how he puts himself in his work, because when I was working on Frankie and Johnny, you know, you can't help but ask him, was like, are you Frankie or are you Johnny? Like, who are you? And he said once, he said, I'm both of them. I'm just arguing with myself. That's basically what this play is. Just two sides of myself fighting one another, you know, and I thought that was so profound.
You know, that Michael, that's also him struggling to love himself, because that's what the parents are trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, can I just say one thing too, which I think is really incredible about you know, really through the whole process, you look at how this is a guy who, you know, wrote great roles for women and wrote extraordinary stories, you know, for gay men, you know, gay characters, but also Frankie and Johnny is a total romance between a man and a woman, or masterclass, extraordinary, you know, for a role for a woman, or musical books for musicals, very underrated talent in, you know, in theater, how difficult it is to do what he did was adapt these books. You know, he had a vast talent, which you could not really sort of put in a box anywhere. He did many things really well. And I really feel, to his credit, you know, he could write for all kinds of people, even though he was right in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of his background, we see this in the film, of, you know, being physically beaten by his father, not really accepted by his father, or probably his mother too, apparently. And then also being, you know, taking a lot of abuse from his classmates. This is growing up in Corpus Christi, Texas in the 1950s. And he certainly had every reason to have absorbed a great deal of self-loathing, but there was at the same time a rather startling acceptance of his own sexuality that then was reflected in the work. And Murray, maybe you could speak to that, of how unusual that was for his time. Coming out.
I'm from Texas too. I'm from El Paso, and in the 50s. But I mean, the idea that a queer in the 50s could emerge as Terrence did, with that kind of balls, that kind of confidence, that kind of courage, because it was dangerous, by the way, in the 50s to be queer. I was one of the people with my gang who used to beat up on queers. I mean, shame on me. But I learned because of Terrence that queers are human beings too. But that's what he insisted on explaining and demanding. It's an extraordinary accomplishment. Texas is different from other states, I got to tell you right now, in many ways. And that was one of them. And it was dangerous to be queer, gay, I'm telling you. And he emerged. And the idea that he had that wonderful relationship with Steinbeck, who supported him so strongly, who was a very straight man. The point is, he superseded all of those what do you call them? Those boxes that we put people in. Where did he get that, considering where he came from? I mean, that's genius. That's an extraordinary accomplishment. And it's a great, I think, finally, it's a great example for all of us to overcome these things, these fears, these. I can't talk enough about him. I gotta tell you, it's you know, I loved him, and I miss him. And he used to live about 4 blocks from me. It's a drag to walk by, you know, where Tom is still there. Anyway, the point is, I guess I shouldn't hammer it too much. He was an extraordinary human being. And I think he proved, which I'm continually trying to do, he proved you can overcome who you're supposed to be and become what you want to be, to accomplish what you can become. That's who he was. Extraordinary man.
How many of Terrence's plays had you seen before you appeared in Frankie and Johnny and the Clair de Lune? Had you seen a number?
I had never seen them. I had never seen them. It was the first play I ever saw of his was the one I did. And then I've done, I guess, about 10 of them since then.
Remarkable. And Michael, how about for you? Because I was talking a couple of days ago with Jeff, and he said he would see you going into the theater to see some Terrence McNally plays. This is before you were in Frankie and Johnny. So you were obviously very familiar with his work.
You know, honestly, I wasn't as much as, I mean, I knew who he was, and I came up in Chicago theater, and I remember productions of his work there, but it was kind of a chance encounter, really, and it was facilitated by a woman named Debbie Bisno, who had produced a play that was my Broadway debut called Grace, and it was really, I have to give her a lot of the credit for it. It was an idea that she had, and she knew Tom, and they arranged a reading of the play, and I went to Terrence and Tom's apartment, and I just remember being, extraordinarily nervous to go there. And yet the second I walked in, just feeling huge relief because of the aura that Tom and Terrence gave, so welcoming, and so, like I said earlier, no airs about them, just, and yeah, but I hadn't had as much going into it as I would have liked to in retrospect, exposure to his work.
And Jeff, one of the great tributes, I think, to Terrence McNally is the extraordinary group of people that you interviewed for the film, including Murray, E. Falco, Nathan Lane, Christine Baranski, Billy Porter. It's an amazing group of people, and I don't think they would show up, and Michael Shannon and Murray today would not, if that wasn't a really unique, special relationship that was developed there. But tell me about kind of making those calls and why these exceptional actors all wanted to be part of the film.
I wish I could say that getting them in the film was some brilliant producing trick, and that it was all because we're so great, but it was really just because of Terrence and Tom and people loyalty to Terrence. I will say that this funny pattern started happening as if it had been scripted, but it wasn't. Person after person after person said, I wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for Terrence. Doris Roberts, Murray, Nathan Lane, Joe Montella. Over and over again, people said the same thing. That's a pretty powerful legacy. If you think about all those lives he changed and then all the reverberations from that, you have modern theater. I also find it fascinating that the work is so strong that you can have Murray play Johnny, or you can have Michael Shannon play Johnny, and each character and each time it becomes something new and fresh decades later. And that's also that continuum through Terrence.
Well, was very striking to me. I think we see it quite beautifully in the film, where we see Zoe Caldwell, the late Zoe Caldwell, and Masterclass, and then Tyne Daly. I mean, just from the clips, you can see how exceptional these performances are and very unique portrayals. But perhaps for Michael or Murray, what about the work allowed for these kind of interpretations that, great actors can really invest themselves in?
I really should have. I remember the first time I saw one of his plays, it was on 13th Street. It was Adaptation Next. It was 2 one-act plays. It was Elaine May's play, which she directed, and his play Next. And Jimmy Coco starred in that play. And it was, I replaced in the show, by the way. And it was the first time I saw Jimmy work. And it was a stunning experience. That's another thing that Terrence seemed to be able to do, was to write specifically for some particular actor. And it didn't matter because, as you said, when another actor stepped in, it became that actor's performance as well. But it was a stunning, for me, it was a great introduction into the kind of possibilities of an actor. I should mention about Michael's performance. It wasn't a Terrence's play, but it was a one-person show practically downtown, which is an astonishing piece of work. But what? No, it was. It was. I saw it twice. I had to go back again. That at the Perry Street Theater. The point is, that speaks to what you were saying, Marcia, about his love of actors. He loved them, and he displayed his love. And through them, he displayed his love for the theater, for the audience. When people went to see his plays, they came away completely satisfied. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, I think one of the reasons, we were talking earlier before about Waiting for Godot, how I was supposed to be doing that and then COVID happened. But anyway, I think the thing that really great playwrights like Beckett or McNally do is they don't just write characters. Like, your job isn't to just show up and play, Abe Lincoln or, the delivery man or whatever. They write about humanness, and they write about what it's like to be alive and existence, and that anybody can really plug into that. Not even just actors. Like, you can just sit and read the play and have your whole heart and mind is swept up in this wave of humanity and the fundamental questions that we all ask ourselves all the time and are constantly grappling with. And you would think on the surface, Beckett and McNally, pretty different playwrights, but I feel like when I read Waiting for Godot and I read Frankie and Johnny, there's something similar happening. There's people fighting for a sense of purpose, of love, of belonging. And I just think that's something that anybody can identify with.
And Jeff, there's an interesting moment in the film where we really get a sense of, I don't know if the word formidable is right for Terrence, because he seemed very approachable and obviously had a wonderful sense of humor, but he was not a pushover. No. Very particular about language and performance. So I want to hear from the actors about that, of that he's paying very much attention to what he calls, commas and semicolons, punctuation. And he doesn't want actors adding uhs and ahs and that sort of thing. I was struck that he probably would not have enjoyed working with Christopher Walken, but well, sort of defy whatever a playwright.
Well, I don't want to sound like the teacher's pet, but I agree with Terrence 100%. I think the writing is, look, everybody brings something to the final product, but I feel like the writing's kind of sacrosanct. It's where everything comes from. And I have the ultimate respect for writers. I couldn't write a play if you put a bazooka to my head. I couldn't do it. I don't know how they do it. And it's magic to me. So I feel the same way. I don't want to mess it up. You know, I feel like I'm delivering the writing to the audience. That's my job, to get out of the way.
Murray, in all the plays that you worked with Terrence on, did you have conversations about changing anything, about adjustments or whatever? We do hear one example.
Oh, listen, we did a lot of, under his lover and sweetheart director, Bobby Drivers, we did quite a few improvisations, which turned up in his plays, the published plays. So, in fact, he was open to that kind of thing, at least when I was working with him. And he, not only that, but one of my lines that was a big laugh in something called Bad Habits, when the play was published, he insisted that that line that he included be attributed to me. I don't think there are any writers aside from Terrence who would have done that, because it was a great laugh and it remains one. The point is, no, he was very generous about that kind of thing and very, very open. The thing that that I loved about him in rehearsal was that he attended the rehearsals. He didn't sit there and kvetch and dictate. He just simply supported you. And I love that about him, because it felt like he was there for us, for me personally. I don't know if that, I wish I could explain how that's missing lately. That kind of human connection, that kind of interplay between all of the people who are trying to create this piece of work. I don't know that that's possible these days because of the money. You know, it's a lot more expensive these days. I don't want to go into that. My point is that he never lost track of, as you said, Michael, humanity. This is why we're doing it. It's a connection. And that's what these people, these wonderful people who have made this film really logged on to. They understand that's exactly what he's about. It is only connect. That's what we're talking about. And I think it's essential and really, right now, particularly important that that kind of thing is that people are reminded of. Am I right?
Yes. And just to add on to that, I was surprised how many of our rehearsals he came to. I mean, here's a play that has been done countless times. He's probably seen it countless times. And the only time he didn't come to rehearsal wasn't because he was tired of coming to rehearsal. It was because he wanted to give Audra and I some time alone to maybe fumble around and not feel the pressure of wanting to get it right for him.
Right.
He would ask, you know, maybe I'll give you guys, it was just, it's extraordinary to me. It wasn't like he'd just written a play yesterday. I mean, it's a play, you know, he'd done. And it was very moving, very moving.
Marcia, I think.
Yeah, you know, Jeff and I talked a lot about this, and I think one thing Jeff, as a director, did so beautifully with the film, you know, is really balance the sort of the work with the personal life. Because Terrence's relationships, both with the men that he loved and also the actors that he loved and the friends, was deeply, deeply important to him. It's why he had, like with Murray, such a long relationships with people, long, deep relationships. But the men in his life that he loved, this is for me, you know, when he talks about that moment in the film where he says, you know, Bobby wanted to be successful more than you wanted to be in a relationship, but I wanted to be in love. I wanted a relationship. And he quested for that, you know, all through his life. And, you know, thank God that he, you know, found Tom, the love, you know, he loved so dearly, you know, and was able to spend the last many, many years with him together. But that's a deep part of what drove Terrence, you know, is love, you know, and seeking that his own his own connections in life with other people. And of course it's in the play. And I just want to comment too about what Michael and Murray said, you know, because we heard this a lot. You know, Terrence did come to all the room. He sat in the back. He took notes. He listened to the actors. He listened to the words. This is one of the beautiful things about theater. You sit in rehearsals, things change. You know, the play, we find the play in the room, Terrence says, because everybody's a part of this magic. It's a community experience. Terrence loved that community, that family. That's why many people like myself were so drawn to theater. It's a community, it's a family, it's so much bigger. And many of the people tell the stories, like in Love, Valor, and Christine, you mentioned, tells that story too. And they were doing, you know, Lips Together, Teeth Apart, you know, how he listened to his actors and he listened to what they as actors were feeling about the material, and he responded to that. His ego, he was able to beautifully take his ego outside the situation, listen to other people, and, you know, build upon his work in response to that. I mean, that's an incredible statement that of an artist. A lot of people don't do that. You know, they resist that. Their ego gets in the way. Terrence wasn't like that.
Yeah, can I just add one thing to it? Because I think some artists either start or later on get kind of hermetically sealed. Duke Ellington had this thing where he would walk down the street or he'd hear his musicians in the other room and he would grab things from them and then they would end up in his compositions. Unlike with Murray, he wouldn't give them credit, but he was always listening. And Terrence talked about how you just go out on the street and you see people here and you see a bus and you see a couple together and suddenly you've written a play. But that also is another life lesson from Terrence, because it means that you've just always got to be engaged and connecting and being there in the moment. I just think that's really powerful, both for an artist, but for anyone in life, to sort of allow yourself to be that open.
And Jeff, tell me about the title for the film. How you came up with that?
You know, I've been thinking about the title for a long time, and the special title that has multiple meanings is really important. Marcia, I remember coming to you and saying, Marcia, I have an idea for the title, but I can't remember what this circumstances were. Do you remember? Can you make up a story if you don't have one?
No, well, usually Jeff would say, well, he usually says, well, I've been thinking about this idea. Oh, it's probably not a good idea. You're probably not going to like it, but I'll just tell you anyway. He always prefaces everything. You're not going to like this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And, you know, he was working on several different titles. And, you know, when he said that, but then he would sort of come downstairs because he has his offices upstairs, the studio. And he'd come down and say, what about, you know, listen to this one. But when he said that, you know, every act of life, it just was so like hit me, because we wanted something that was both connected to the theater, but at the same time reflective of a major theme we had for the film, which is that creativity isn't limited by your age. If you want to keep working, you work. If you want to keep creating, you keep creating. I mean, you know, we met many actors like Murray, you know, I mean, my God, you know, so many people. I mean, Chita Rivera and Rita Moreno and, you know, Angela Lansbury, John Candy. These are people that are, you know, not, you know, coming up actors. They're people with incredible established careers, and they want to keep working. They want to keep creating. They want to keep acting and doing their craft. And Terrence was like that. And I think the title really reflected that every act of Terrence's life was an evolving experience of creativity and work that was keeping going.
And at the beginning of the film, Terrence says, do I matter? I've always wanted to know, do I matter? And I think I remember I did this one film, and a very famous person, the child of this very famous person, privately said to me, he left a trail of tears wherever he went. So that person accomplished great things and destroyed everyone around them. And Terrence shows that, you know, again, I'm not trying to be pretentious, but every act of life, everything you do matters. And that's what adds up to who you are. And that's adds up with what you leave behind. It's all the small things, not just being on the marquee. And I think that's one of the things we fell in love with about Terrence, is that you you see it in both.
Mm.
I think there were, it is striking that there were distinct acts in his life in many respects, and certainly one of the key transitional points is that famous party that he went to, where he was, as he describes it himself, was very drunk and had two very different kinds of encounters. First with Lauren Bacall, and then with Angela Lansbury. And I perhaps Marcia or Jeff, you could share that again for those who may not have seen the film yet.
Well, he was at it was a birthday party actually for Stephen Sondheim. I think it was Stephen Sondheim's 50th birthday party, and it was at the, I think it was at the Belasco or the Morosco Theater. Actually, it was this party, and he was at a phase of his life. He would say himself, he was drinking more than he was writing, and at one point, he sort of bumped into Lauren Bacall and accidentally spilled his drink on her, and she, criticized him loudly. But one of the things, at a certain point, Angela Lansbury called him over and she said, "Hey, I want to talk to you." And he told the story, they went up to the balcony actually, and they were sitting in the theater balcony. And she says, we don't really know each other, but, I know you're a talented guy. I know your work, and you're destroying yourself. All the time I see you, you're like this. You need to do something about it. You need to stop drinking. And, shortly after that, I don't know, it was one of those moments in a person's life. And shortly thereafter, Terrence gave up drinking and never had a drink again. Was sober till the rest of his entire life, which is so extraordinary too. And, Angela said when she spoke about it, because she reflected upon it saying, she wondered, because she'd never done that for anyone before. She hardly knew Terrence, and yet she felt this compelling need to sort of say this to him. And Angela's pretty open. She went through a lot of difficulties with her own children who struggled with addiction and things. And for some reason, she needed to do this for Terrence, and she's never done it for anyone else since.
And just to lead back to Michael and Murray, the first play he wrote sober was Frankie and Johnny and the Clair de Lune.
Mm. Right, and he talked about being uncertain whether he would be able to write sober. And I'm sure that is probably was a fear for Hemingway and Fitzgerald and some of the other hard drinking great writers and other mediums. But Murray, was that, you knew him for so long, and you saw, I'm sure, these personal struggles that he went through. How upsetting was that for you?
I wish I could be more specific about that, but I can't. All I know is that it was always focused on the work and our friendship. I never saw those problems. I apologize. I must have been very self-centered. I'm still a little self-centered, but anyhow, I didn't see that. And I didn't know that this was the first play he wrote after he had sobered up, frankly. But I can tell you that in all the years before that, the plays I worked with him on, I didn't see it interfering with his work process. But then we were all drinking and doping quite a bit anyway, so maybe I wasn't able to. The point is that the work superseded that. The work overcame it. And I'm glad that he did stop drinking, because he did, a huge body of work. But it never interrupted our relationship and our friendship. I think that his humanity overcame everything. And I'm so thankful for Angela for doing what she did for him. It must have been him that reached her to reach out to him to do what she did. How else do you explain it? If she's never done it before or since, it's got to be one of those things, one of those acts of life.
Very, very touching moment in the film. And you can see just how extraordinary it was. That clearly this is not something that Angela Lansbury was doing frequently, intervening and that sort of thing. It was this remarkable, again, it comes back to that idea of connection that you talked about. I know he spent a lot of time in Florida later on, and divided his time between there and New York, I guess. But Murray, when was the last time that you saw him?
The last time we saw each other was in London. I was doing a play there, and I think a play that Tom had just finished producing was closing while mine was opening. And we had dinner together, and that's the last time I saw him.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't want to get into that too much. The thing that I really regret, I think most about Terrence's passing, is that he's not going to write any more plays. I mean, I'm so selfish. I want more of his plays. I want to see where it was going to go, because it was such a huge genre. He kept trying to investigate so many different ways of writing plays, ways of talking about what he believed in. And he accomplished it. I mean, that wonderful piece he did about Bernstein, that terrific piece of work. It's completely different from what he did about Maria Callas, although they're both about music. I mean, that was the range of his piece, his work and his mind. I keep thinking, what would his next piece have been? He promised me he's going to write me a play. He said, we're gonna go around the park one more time.
I just to say, I saw an interview, Murray. It's on YouTube that Terrence did not too far before he passed away. I think it was down in Texas. And he was asked what he's thinking about writing, and he said, I'm really obsessed with racial inequality in this country. And I'd really like to do something that addresses the racial divisions in this country. And I just find that kind of astounding. And like you, I would have liked to have seen that play.
Yeah.
And Michael, are there other Terrence McNally plays that you would like to appear in at some point? And we were talking about all of the uncertainty about the theater going forward because of COVID, but assuming we get back to those times where we can have live theater happening with audiences, what work of his is there work you'd like to explore beyond?
I mean, I'd be open to all of it. It's interesting. Nobody's proposed it or come forward about it, but yeah, it would be sad because he wouldn't be there. He wouldn't be at the table, but Tom probably would. That's an interesting thing. Maybe I'll ask Tom about it, because he's kind of going to be the one carrying the torch, as it were. It seems like now.
And it's I think for everyone, one of the things that makes the COVID pandemic so tragic and so difficult is really the difficulty of mourning in ways that allow us to process loss. And we're not, obviously families of loved ones dying in the hospital and that sort of thing are not having those kind of, moments that are really, really important. And a figure like Terrence, who meant so much to the theater and to individual actors and other people he touched, it is a loss not to have a kind of public memorial, or at least so far, where we can come together and appreciate his work.
If I could just say one thing, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, and I don't want to take away the pain of his loss at all. But the wonderful thing is, though, that Terrence lives on through so many plays that will have life over and over and over again. But the other thing is that he lives on through so many other playwrights. I mean, you see young playwrights writing now, and you say, oh, a piece of Terrence went into that person. And so, at least we see, all those seeds planted and growing, and that's a remarkable thing.
Yeah, that's something, that we didn't really talk about, but Terrence was also a mentor to a lot of playwrights. I mean, John Robin Bates talks about it in the film, and Matthew Lopez, who just had his, The Inheritance on Broadway and won the Olivier, was nominated. I mean, Tony's, you know, extraordinary play. There's so many people like that. You know, he really supported a lot of young up and coming artists, you know, like Murray. I love the story you say, Murray, about him giving you credit for the one line, because I mean, Terrence, that's what he did. He mentored people, he taught, he mentored, and he's so giving. I just, to ask you one question, Matthew, you know, I know Terrence couldn't make it to Outfest, but you got an opportunity to speak to him on the phone and actually get a chance to interview him yourself. And I know he was very open and friendly that day, even in the midst of all that.
Indeed. And we don't have a lot of time left, but
hard.
Yeah, Murray, I'm curious about all the work that you did. You probably can't single out a particular play or character that you played of his.
Oh,
But
lots of them. I loved Frankie and John. I can't tell you. There's so much about my life in that play, by the way, lots. But I loved Chris. I loved examining a very gay man because it was so completely opposite of what I was as a young punk in El Paso. To examine that aspect, that part of my personality, it was so real to me. This gay man who was completely unafraid. But it's not just that. It seems to me that the characters, each one that I played, was real to me. I don't know what more you can say about a playwright, what greater compliment you could give. They were legitimate. They were real. They were not bullshit characters. I happen to love Shakespeare. What can I tell you? He is very satisfying. And I feel the same way. I feel that Will Shakespeare, when I do some of his characters, he thought of me when he wrote those plays. I absolutely believe that. And I feel the same way about Terrence. I think that what we are talking about are a couple of people who were born to the theater, and we didn't have any business being in the theater. I'm from the border of Texas, of Mexico. He is from Corpus Christi. And it's a state I don't want to ever go back to. And I think he feels the same way. But look what we became.
Right.
It's just an example of our potential, our human potential. We are so much better than what this country has become. I don't want to get into that aspect, but we really can be better than what we are. We really can accomplish a great deal. We have that potential, and he proved it. I'll get off my soapbox.
I think that's beautifully said. And so we only have a couple more minutes, but are there final thoughts from any of you that you'd like to share, or observations about Terrence, perhaps, that you want to make?
Can I say one quick thing, which is just that Terrence says in the film and multiple times in life that theater is collaborative and life is collaborative. We need that spirit. You know, for Marcia and me, we're just so touched by so many people who helped this film, and we can't ever thank everyone enough in every level for what they contributed to this, including the folks at American Masters who gave it this great life that has meant so much to Terrence. And so just want to say thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
Please.
It was always a good time. It was really fun. Don't forget that. It's called a play.
Yeah.
Well, I thought about that. It's like, I don't think John Steinbeck would just pick anybody to be a traveling companion. Terrence must have been very,
Absolutely. Right.
he was very young at that point, but he must, you know,
Yeah.
I'm sure. He was
I
fun.
would say for me, you know, Terrence always had that twinkle in his eye. And he had a really sexy twinkle in his eye, and he really always had it. I mean, you know, it was like you could see it when he was very young, but into his 80s, he always had that twinkle and that zest for life.
Yeah.
And Michael, are there things that you can take inspiration from your experience of working on the play, but also knowing getting to know Terrence to some degree.
You know, it just comes down to the way he carried himself, you know, like we've hit on time and time again. You know, something that was really magical about the production of Frank and Johnny we did is that he gave a young female director her first opportunity to direct a play on Broadway. Someone he had been a real fan of over the years, her work with Shakespeare, and someone who probably, were it not for Terrence, would have had a hard time getting that opportunity. But Terrence was fearless, and he knew she could do it, and he wanted to see her version of it. And he gave Aaron Arbus this opportunity. And, you know, in the grand scheme of things and the entire life and body of his work, it may not seem like a huge deal, but I know how much it meant to Aaron. And I was glad that it was her, and that, and that he was willing to trust her because she did an amazing job. And that's just another example of someone whose life and career he helped advance. And as opposed to just relying on the safe choice, the proven entity. And it's just another example of his courage.
Right.
You know.
I see that he did play a similar role with Joe Mantello. Has become
Exactly.
a great Broadway director, obviously. Well, I want to thank you all for this wonderful conversation about one of America's great playwrights, unfortunately, the late Terrence McNally. The film is Terrence McNally, Every Act of Life, directed, written, and produced by Jeff Kaufman, who joined us from Los Angeles, produced by Marcia Ross, also from Los Angeles. Thank you so much, Michael Shannon, coming all the way from Australia. Good luck on your project, and F.Murray Abraham from Manhattan. Thank you all so much. The American Masters, Emmy nominated for Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Series. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Call me when you get to New York.
All right.